Hello and welcome to this very special show on IIPA Stalwarts Speak. I am Rakhee Bakshee. In this show, we get to speak to bright minds, people who have perspectives and who also share their valuable insights with us. Today, I have a very special guest with me. She is Secretary of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. She is Ms Leena Nandan. Leena Nandan ji is of course a very senior bureaucrat and somebody who keeps a perspective and eye on what's happening around and also has literary interest. I'm going to talk to her about range of issues. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining this show. First of all, let us begin with something which is very much in front of us. And we are seeing these flood-like situation. They are saying the water levels are rising. We are looking at this whole balance of climate change. And I would, of course, come to other points. But what is happening right now? People are a little panicked. We are seeing water levels rising. What's happening?
There are very worrying weather events that are happening within the country and all across the world. And as you rightly put it, climate change is actually responsible for so much of unprecedented things happening in different parts of the country and across the globe. And this torrential rain and sometimes the unseasonal drought or even the unexpected snowfall in different parts of the world, all of these indicate that there is this existential crisis that the planet is facing. And that is why this ministry, and along with this ministry, stakeholders from across governments, departments, and in fact people and people's organizations, all of us have to work closely together so that on the one hand we come out with the right policies and programs, and on the other, at the grassroots level, how these projects are implemented and how people's behavior can make a difference. All of it really has to fit into a very proactive scheme of things.
Taking from what you're saying actually and looking at again the present situation, we are talking about climate change. But talk about this day-to-day understanding of everyone. We have seen talking about extreme weather conditions, heat wave, suddenly unprecedented. And as you're saying, some of the areas like Rajasthan, if you're seeing water levels like that, if you're seeing Tamil Nadu is witnessing some extreme conditions sometimes. I mean, these patterns which to a common man does not seem so understandable. So how would you really explain as to what's happening in terms of on the ground, and the overall holistic horizon of the climate change?
Climate change, if we put it into very basic and simple terms, it's because of the greenhouse gas emissions. And therefore, how countries move to reduce their emissions and the carbon footprint is actually what will make a difference in the long run. And that is something that this country has been moving towards very proactively. So ever since 2015, the Paris Agreement, when the Honorable Prime Minister had gone and declared the NDCs that the country had made a commitment towards, and those targets, though we were looking at 2030, we much ahead of time, we have been able to actually meet the targets, reduction in emission intensity of the economy, the amount of energy that is from non-fossil fuel sources of energy. All of that, we've gone on to achieve it, but then we've set the bar even higher for ourselves. So in 2021, in COP26, again, the Prime Minister enunciated his vision of Panchamrit, and that included the NDCs. So we've raised our targets beyond whatever we'd declared, because we believe that we are a part of the solution. And that solution means working across sectors and in every sector to reduce carbon emissions. So in 2030, now we are committed to enhanced reduction in the emission intensity. We will be achieving 50% of our installed capacity through non-fossil fuel sources. So all of these are definitely pledges that India has made to the world and to itself. And we believe in walking the talk. We are definitely on track to achieve all these ambitions. But the one clarion call that was also given, which was a part of the Panchamrit, was on Mission Life.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that. Mission Life, tell us more about that.
So Mission Life is about how people and individuals, through our behaviors, through our choices, how we can make a difference, how we can be part of the solution. Because every individual, in whatever they do, the amount of energy they consume, in fact, simple things like switching off lights when you don't need them, or the temperature of the air conditioner that you use, or of the geyser that you are using at home, the choice that you make in terms of how much energy you consume when you're traveling, Do you opt for public transport? Do you opt for healthy lifestyles which do not necessarily involve consumption of more electricity? So all of it is about sustainable consumption. And the message that we are taking to the world, and in fact very successfully in India also, in the run-up to the World Environment Day, there was a month-long series of activities, and it had a humongous impact in terms of the activities. Around 16 lakh events across the country, 2.5 crore people participated, and they did very specific actions like cleaning garbage from water bodies, cleaning the beaches, collecting plastic, doing bicycle rallies in favor of clean transport solutions, planting of trees.
So on one hand, you're saying that what the government is doing or intends to do, and on the other hand, how the citizens should also come forward. So there is a chain that stakeholders should actually maintain,
Absolutely.
isn't it? And what all can be done? Because we are talking about the global climatic landscape there, and as you said, India's commitment and India's endeavor also. But there has to be a balance. We are, of course, a developing nation. We are diverse. How to really go forward?
So as a developing country, one of the biggest challenges that we have is how do we balance economy and ecology? Because development and environment cannot be mutually opposing, but they have to be moving in tandem.
Exactly.
So that is where the stakeholder involvement is very important. Though we have continued to flag our concerns about climate justice and climate equity, we are a growing nation, and there are a lot of economic activities that we need to do to fulfill the aspirations of 1.4 billion plus population. At the same time, how do we harmonize environmental concerns? And I think that is the balance that we have achieved and that we are continuously striking to achieve. Because on the one hand, economic activities, but balancing them with the safeguards like greening of our country, plantation, like the proper management of waste and management of our emissions. So both of these are things that we are doing in the country, while we continue to flag the concerns for the need for climate finance and development technology from the developed world.
You know, when talking about this ministry, we're talking about environment, we're talking about forest, and we're talking about climate change. Looking at even forest, how do we really look at more conservation, how people should also come forward? And as we are saying, this whole balance of sustainable development, when we talk about, has to be there. So how do we really harmonize all that?
So that's a very good point that you're making, and that is why the ministry has been focusing extensively on not just protecting our forests and increasing our forest cover, but also encouraging trees outside forest to come up. So agroforestry, supporting farmers with species and genotypes of trees that are more income generating, facilitating the seamless movement of these trees, because there is a huge wood-based industry that is in our country, which is a very important economic activity. So how do we support it? By having proactive policies for trees outside forest. Also, when we encourage these plantations, we add to the carbon sequestration and we add to the whole environmental, concern that we are trying to address. We have recently come out with a very innovative concept of the green credit framework, and we have notified that draft for public consultation. It is about encouraging pro-environment activities. I spoke about mission life, which is about individual behavior. The green credit framework is about community behavior. So communities that plant trees, take care of water bodies, or municipal bodies that do good waste management. How can we assign a value to it, and this value to be brought to a platform where it can be traded? So assign a commercial value and facilitate that. That is the concept behind the green credit framework. It has been very well received. It's out for public consultation. And we are getting very good response from the stakeholders.
Since you talked about this green credit and of course how it is reaching out to people at large, talking about municipal infrastructure, and again I would like to bring in here people's perspective also as to how do we create that environment where we are committed to SDG, we also have net zero in front of us, with those global commitments that India is making, and how in-house we can do things. For example, you talked about many measures that citizens should do, but what all are in terms of the policies is being done?
So when you mentioned urban local bodies, there is a very important aspect which is again closely connected with the whole environment and pollution issue. That is the circular economy principle, where waste to wealth is the fundamental concept behind it. And here is where the municipal bodies are now working to support proper collection of waste, segregation, aggregation and supplying this waste to authorized recyclers. And here again the ministry has taken very proactive steps to encourage proper waste management and waste disposal by what we call the EPR regulations, Extended Producer Responsibility regulations. We came out with a series of regulations for different sectors last year: plastic, waste tires, batteries, electronic and electrical waste. All of these, the value chain means that connecting the recyclers with the producers, so that ultimately the producers have to be part of the processing value chain, and they either do it themselves or they encourage recyclers to responsibly extract the material that can be reused for producing a new set of products, so that you minimize extraction of virgin material and you recycle to the extent possible. So it is economic and it is efficient, and of course very good for the environment.
Since you're talking about that, I just thought about asking you about EVs also. So, I think this ministry has to coordinate with other ministries as well, and we are talking about integration. So, how a coordinated approach can be made. So, use of vehicles also which have less emissions. We are talking about air pollution. We've seen in Delhi, of course, a lot of this happening. How would you really look at those day-to-day activities and then policies merged into that?
So stakeholder engagement and working with line ministries and departments is of course critical to the success of anything that we take up at a policy level, because a policy is as good as its implementation.
Exactly.
And electric vehicles are a very important part of our whole strategy for long-term low emission development strategy. And we already in the Panchamrit, the Prime Minister talked about 2070 being net zero. So one of the important things that would lead us to sustainable transport is actually more and more offtake of electric vehicles. But then at the same time, the disposal of the batteries, the reuse and refurbishing of batteries, that is an important aspect, and which is why we have incorporated it in the rules that I just mentioned. The EPR rules for batteries actually also take into account electric vehicle batteries. And that's something that if we create a virtuous value chain, that furthers the cause of electric vehicle adoption, but also minimizes the environmental impact of these activities.
Some of the measures that I'm sure the ministry is also taking is when we talk about sustainable development as to in certain areas. For example, we have also seen in places which are hilly, Uttarakhand and all, we've seen certain things which is related to disaster. So how do we really focus in a very targeted manner on some of the targeted areas to really look at it, to preserve and conserve?
So to give you a macro picture of how this ministry is connected with activities that would harm the fragile ecology of certain places, and there are many areas which have intrinsic vulnerability. So when we talk about climate change, that necessarily affects our mountainous regions, because of if there's heavy rain and there's a propensity for landslides. Similarly, our coastal regions are very prone to climate impact through cyclones and these kind of conditions that impact the lives and the livelihoods and the properties of people living along the coastlines. So the way that we address it is that activities, economic activities that take place in these areas, they have to come in with not just a proper environment impact assessment, but also a mitigation plan that focuses on mitigating the negative impact of that particular activity, and then ensuring that the compliance is actually happening as per the safeguards that were prescribed as part of the environmental approvals.
Yeah, sure. The Big Cat Alliance, would you like to talk about that?
So India last year, in fact, we reintroduced cheetahs into the country, and this was the first in the world translocation from one continent to another. So it was a very delicate and complex exercise, and with that we now have 5 of the 7 big cats that are known in the world, and we feel that there is a lot of learnings that we can share as a country which has, as I mentioned, 5 of the 7 big cats, and which has continuously increased the population of tigers. So this year we celebrated 50 years of Project Tiger, and we are well above the number of 3,000. So we've achieved what we had declared. Again, ahead of time we were able to achieve the doubling of tiger numbers. But ultimately, what is the important thing to be seen here is that the tiger is an actually apex species. Therefore, the protection of the tiger and the flourishing of the tiger population means that there is the biodiversity chain is being protected and preserved, because there is huge interconnectedness of different species. Therefore, the numbers increasing means that everything down the value chain is also flourishing and is also being properly conserved and protected. So that is something that we have done very well on at a at a global level. These learnings many other countries would like to share, and the success stories, so that going forward the world is increasingly becoming aware of the need to protect the biodiversity, to protect its forests and its environment, to reduce emissions. India has among the lowest per capita emissions in the world, and that is something that we are very conscious of. So as we move forward, as I mentioned, our long-term development strategy actually looks at how we will develop, but it will be a low carbon pathway. So that is a commitment that we have made, and which we are absolutely confident of being able to keep.
So in global conferences, one has seen you also being part of certain delegations. We are actually putting in our point of view. I mean, there is a big case out there for India to make, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think we have articulated our position very clearly, forcefully, and we are building, we are finding our concepts resonating across the world. So when I spoke about Mission Life, that is something that has actually seen an offtake in so many global conversations and dialogues, whether it is in the G7 or it is in the SCO or it is in the World Bank Spring meetings. So everywhere there is an increasing understanding of this basic fact that individuals have to also contribute by instead of mindless consumption, mindful utilization. And that principle of mindful utilization of resources is something that is doable, implementable, practicable and necessary.
But how do we actually look at some of the concerns and challenge, for example, development, so mining, for example, some of these things which are part of the industrial development also. So how do we actually then balance it all?
So you have raised a very important and interesting aspect. Mining is something that we use those materials and minerals to actually further the cause of our economic development. That is why the circularity that I mentioned, the resource efficiency is very important to minimize. We will not say that we can stop doing the mining altogether, but to minimize the amount of material that we extract, because circularity means that we continue to use what is possible to recover from the waste material. The other important aspect when we talk about mining is how do we reclaim the closed mines and the abandoned mines. One of our G20 themes, the G20 presidency, and we are heading towards the last and final meeting of the Environment and Climate Sustainability Group. So one of the key themes that we've taken up in the G20 is how to reclaim the mines, how to bring back their biodiversity, so that we are constantly mindful of the need to bring back the original position and to bring back the biodiversity, indigenous species, how do we nurture them. That is something that we have shared very good models, and all countries have brought forward their ideas. So a very meaningful presidency document is expected to be finalized at the close of our
That's
G20
something which
meeting.
is very encouraging. But talking about India's case again, we are talking about green farming. So how do we look at agriculture, which is the axis of our development somewhere?
Agriculture also is actually making very serious efforts and met a lot of success. So even in the amount of, when they talk about solar irrigation systems, or when they talk about promoting drip irrigation to minimize, or even the crops, the promotion of millets, which everybody knows are so good not only for the health but also the less amount of water that they consume. Pulses, we know they are so good for the soil. Then the practices which are more and more towards natural regenerative.
The green habits, so to say, to be adopted.
Yes, green habits. So that also is again part of the life message that we've taken across, where we're encouraging people to do composting and use that compost in their gardens, in their indoor plants. And that is something which as a culture is getting increasingly popular among people, and farmers are also seeing the benefits of using more and more natural materials.
I'll just go to the global landscape once again, and what kind of support are we getting? I mean, once we are making our own case, we are pledging, we have our commitments, how do we get at the geopolitical level the support that India should have?
So the messages that we take across of climate finance and the need for technology have been accepted broadly. We are in the process of doing a lot of negotiations through COP and in many other meetings in the run-up to COP to really hammer out the details and the nitty-gritties of how these funds will flow for adaptation, for mitigation, for even the loss and damages to vulnerable island economies. So these are the aspects that we have continued to emphasize, and we see a lot of buy-in from many countries across the world. And again, going towards COP28, we would continue to push for clearer finance flows to come out from the developed countries, and the ways that they would support through technology development and co-development to assist the emerging economies in growing, but growing in such a manner that it is actually taking climate change concerns into account.
Yeah, at IIPA we are looking at, of course, at public administration, and I think it's very much linked as to how administration at that level should be looked at. And a lot of people who are watching us would be interested to know how can they contribute, what can be their role. What would you like to say there?
I think IIPA, in fact, I was in IIPA, I did a course around 10 years back, 2012 to 2013.
Okay. You're so privileged, yeah.
We it was a very good exposure, and across different services, and from the civilian services and the defense forces also there was very good representation. So it's a good platform for getting to know much more about what individual organizations and services can contribute to a shared vision. So ultimately, a lot of what we do will be possible only if there's a shared vision, and that has to go not just across departments and ministries or state governments and urban bodies. It has to actually be a common vision that people share and that people identify with, and then can work towards becoming a part, as I said, of the solution. And I think we have been able, especially through this focus on mission life, to take the message out very well, and people are responding very favorably in doing those big and small actions that can make a change to the environment and climate and to the world as we see it today.
And how are we looking at a vision for 2047? Our Honorable Prime Minister, of course, is focusing a lot on that as to how we shape up India towards that.
So there is a clear articulation of the vision for 2047 and how different groups of ministries and departments can work towards a common pathway. So there is a lot of brainstorming that has happened and common roadmap that has emerged, and I'm sure that once this common roadmap is then broken down into individual actions that ministries would undertake with the stakeholders, we would definitely be on target to achieve that vision of 2047.
I would now like to come to a part that is very dear to you, and it's very interesting to us, which is the literary part, the literature that is hidden behind you somewhere. But I don't know how, with your busy schedule, you actually do it. And one after the other, you come out like a magician with another book. And now, who are these people? That's the latest book that you've written. Tell us more about that. And how did it really, the seed of an idea? Tell us the secret.
Well, there is no one secret or magical formula that made me think about this, but it is a thought that had increasingly been coming to my mind, that there are different people in different organizations who are working towards a common goal, but they do not actually get known. And what are the what do those particular services do, what do they stand for, and how do the people, the individuals with their life stories, how do they connect? So it's something that very few people think about, and definitely is not shared in the sense of a story. And that got me thinking, and when I introspected, I found that we had, over the years of our experience in different places and different assignments, met so many different people, and we had appreciated what they've done, and there were some unique aspects of their characters. That was a kind of a three-dimensional story that could be said in terms of being interconnected. And that is why this book, Who Are These People, is actually something that I feel would maybe not answer the question, but provoke curiosity.
This reminds me of the term we are using, and of course again the vision of our Honorable Prime Minister, Karma Yogi Bharat. So a Karma Yogi would have competencies, skills, and those creative ideas, which I think you're very ably working on. One must congratulate you on that. But tell us, how does it synchronize? I mean, with your work, which is at office, and how much do you get time to really look at your literary interest? And then how do you also try and put everything together?
Actually, if you have the passion for something, you find the time for it. That's what I feel. I've always liked writing. I used to write all through school and college. Then sometime down the line, I thought I would write a work of fiction. I did write one around 10 years ago in 2014. But then this idea, as I said, of different civil services and people in the civil services, and then we have a foundation course in Missouri.
Yeah.
That connects us, and very often as we lead our individual lives and go down our individual journeys, sometimes we lose track, sometimes we reconnect, and that reconnection at times happens at an official level also. But it is something where we have started out from some common place, and that is something which connects us. And then the sacrifices that a lot of people make, that doesn't really, get captured. And there are so many people who are working, who are, let me say, unseen, unknown, unsung. So how do their lives, carry a story that is worth sharing? That is the thought that came to my mind. That's how it then translated into being put down on paper and a book eventually.
I'm sure everybody should love to read it. Talking about some of the young people preparing for UPSC, and I would come to that very methodical question, what is the mantra? What is your message to many of these young people who are preparing for UPSC, want to be an IS like you, should do?
So academic, of course, hard work is something that is a prerequisite, because knowledge of your subject and ability to think through different issues of the subject would be required, definitely. There is also a lot of the public persona of a civil servant is an intrinsic part of the career path. So therefore, development of the personality skills, interpersonal skills. And I would also say that there is the need for a holistic approach, and later on in life and through your career, you find that the emotional quotient is something that is very important, because as a team player, sometimes you're a team player and sometimes you're a leader, but everywhere you connect with people. So individuals should be able to hone their own strengths, and their strengths would be, I would say, intellectual as well as emotional. And that is something that comes out very well, even they may not realize it, in the way they would answer the questions and the way they would face the interview. So an all-round approach to life and to their studies is what I would advise.
And finally, my last question would be your green message to all the people who are watching.
My message is that let us try and live our lives responsibly, using the ethical values that have been ingrained in us, but which very often we may not really be listening to that inner voice. And that inner voice, if it tells us that our responsibility to the environment and to Mother Nature is something that is as important as everything else that we are doing in our lives, I think all of us as individuals would have made a big difference to the world that we live in.
Thank you so much. It was truly a delight for me as an interviewer to interview you today and get your time and perspective on these range of issues. We would continue to look at your work and would like to connect with you once again. Thank you so much and all the very best. And that was Ms Leena Nandan talking to us about a range of issues. She's of course talked about environment, forest, climate change, these issues, but also a literary interest. Keep watching our show to get more about ideas about life and new perspectives. Thank you so much.